Hi everybody, so this month we are looking at painting water, and I'm really excited about this subject because I think there's just so much variety within the subject of painting water, and it's one of those subjects a bit like shadows, which we did last month, where it can be a little bit tricky. You can feel like maybe you just want to avoid that subject, it's too difficult, but actually if you've got a few really solid techniques for tackling that subject, it can make it much easier to approach and really boost your confidence. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to teach you some of my tried and tested techniques for painting water, particularly looking at creating reflections and creating ripples and movement in water. Because I think when we're painting water, it's more than just getting the blue paint out. It is about movement, it's about light, and it's about looking at what we're really seeing and then making an artistic decision rather than making an assumption, which the assumption might be water is blue, because it isn't always. You know, sometimes it's turquoise, sometimes it's green here in the UK, sometimes it's brown, but quite often when we're painting and really looking at the view, we're not even painting the colour of the water. What we're really seeing is the reflections on the water, so we're painting the colours of the things around it. So then the question is, how do we paint those reflections and make it look like water without necessarily using lots of blue? How do we make it look like the water's moving, that these are reflections, that they're not solid? What techniques can we use to show that? You know, we don't want it just to be a perfect kind of flipped mirror image. So I'm going to be showing you some great techniques for capturing reflections and capturing movement in water. And I've got a few examples here. I've been looking back through my sketchbook, seeing how have I painted water in different ways, and just kind of looking at all the variety within water. So in this piece, we've got very shallow water, we've got some reflections, and we've got some lovely granulation here with my chromatic grey mix, which has got quite a lot of the blue in, but it has got the yellow and the red as well, and that granulation helps with kind of the feel of shallow water on sand. And then pieces like this, we've got rivers and lakes, so they're much more green. So we're going to be looking at this technique, creating the sense of ripples and movement, and this was painted on location opposite a beautiful pond, so again we've got this sense of movement. And I find that painting water on location when I can is so beneficial, because water in a photo is fine. We're going to be working from photos this month, it's absolutely fine, but there is something about seeing water in person, seeing the reflections, seeing the movement, seeing the light, that is really, really helpful. And I've had some kind of little breakthroughs in terms of how I paint water as a result of painting it from life. So this was painted from life, and then, where is it? This was painted from life as well. So very, very different type of water. This one we were looking at before is quite deep, it's a pond, very green, and then this one is very shallow, and obviously it's the sea, and we've got the reflections of people in this very shallow water, and we're going to be looking at this technique as well. And then in terms of colour in water, in this one we've got the colour of the sunset, and then this one we've got the surroundings, the trees, the canal boat, all of that. So we're going to be looking at these techniques. But first up, I just wanted to look at a little bit of inspiration first. So again, researching this subject, I had a look at my own sketchbooks, how have I drawn water, and then I thought, let's have a look at artists and illustrators that I admire and see how they have drawn water. So I'm going to show you those now. So first up, Kirsten Simms. I absolutely love her work. I love this piece so much. There's so much going on in the water. There's so much depth. The water's really dark. We've got reflections of the trees. We've got reflections of the boat. We've also got a sense of movement. So we've got the reflections and the ripples interacting. So they're kind of the yellow and white bits of the boat moving out and getting bigger. But there's also a sense that there's stuff under the water as well, maybe kind of plant life and that kind of thing. So there's so much going on, but Kirsten hasn't overworked it at all. Her brushstrokes are so expressive and loose. Really, really beautiful. I'm not sure what this is painted, whether it's maybe acrylic gouache or maybe oils. Kirsten is an illustrator and fine artist who exhibits, so it could be oils or acrylic, but yeah, I love this piece. Great sense of movement and a really great example of painting water that's quite complicated without overworking it. I've got some other pieces by Kirsten here, so again, just love the simplicity of how she's painted the water and capturing the colour of the water, so absolutely no blue in sight. You know, the water's this kind of murky yellowy colour with these little grey dashes for the waves. And then this one, very different water. We've got all the beautiful colours of the sky, and you can tell the sun is setting, or the rocks and the buildings are really kind of glowing with that setting sun, and then capturing that colour on the water, and then doing the waves on top kind of darker black, and where the water is in shadows it's almost black, which I love. I probably wouldn't have thought of doing that. I would have maybe thought, let's put white on top because we get white on waves, but actually the yellow and the blue makes so much sense. And it's these kind of things you notice from observation, learn from really looking at water, being there and drawing in person if you can, or just even if you can't draw, just kind of looking and observing. So love that piece as well. So someone else that does water really well is who I've talked about before is Sydney Smith. He draws water quite a lot. So we've got this one here where you can really feel the sunlight sparkling on the water, and his brushstrokes are very kind of loose, but they create so much atmosphere. And what I'm noticing in all these pieces is they all have such distinct atmosphere. So that piece is really lovely, the sparkling light on the water. And this one here, very simple, but I love the range of brushstrokes. I think that'd be something it'd be great for us to play around with, is creating a range of brushstrokes to get a sense of movement in the water, ripples, different kind of depths of water, the light shining on the water. Someone else who I've talked about before whose work I love is Daniel Miyares. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Love this one of the water at sunset. I just love these kind of big, dramatic, dry brush strokes of blue over the top of the orange. Such a great way of creating that sense of movement in the water and the different colours in the water. I love this piece by Naomi Tipping in her sketchbook. Lots of lovely loose brush strokes in all these shades of green, picking up the colour in the trees. And then I think she's used like a white pastel over the top to create that opaqueness and put in the detail of where there's kind of movement on the water, light on the water. So that's really lovely. And then finally, another artist who I love is, and I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, Yukiko Noritake, who is an incredible artist, and I love the way that they've captured the reflections in the water. So they've used the exact same colour palette for the buildings, which is a beautiful limited palette, in the water, but they've completely changed the brush strokes. So here we've got these kind of very long brush strokes. And in this one, the reflections are even more simplified. We've got a kind of wet on wet technique, and a big wide brush has just been pulled straight down, which I love. It's really beautiful and really effective. And then we've got another technique here, and with the reflections here, we've got a little bit more detail. We can see buildings, we can see the windows, we can see the roofs, we can see all that detail, but it's really hazy. It feels like you've turned blur on Photoshop. It's all got that kind of hazy blur. I think this is probably oil paint, but yeah, it's got that kind of real softness, but you could possibly create that with kind of wet on wet if you're using gouache, not letting things totally dry before to get that kind of softness. So 3 slightly different, really lovely techniques for capturing reflections, and again, no blue. is what I'm noticing, being bold enough just to go for the reflections and be playful with your brush strokes and your techniques. So that's what I've learned from looking at these fantastic artists. I'll link them in the post, and I'll also link them in the inspiration chat. But now I think it's time for us to have a bit of a play with our paints and try out some techniques. So the first technique we're going to look at is this one. So I painted this on a recent trip to Norfolk. This is Wales Next to the Sea, which is a very, very beautiful beach, very beloved. And the tide goes way, way out and leaves these big kind of pools of water that people can kind of walk across. And because it's very shallow, still water, you get these lovely reflections. And I painted this on location, so sitting outside my aunt's beach hut, chatting with this sketchbook and a little watercolour set, and probably painted this in about half an hour maybe. And I came up with this technique for the reflections just kind of then and there, and I was really happy with it. And that's what I love about painting on location. I find I have so many breakthroughs in finding ways to capture and to simplify things like shadows, reflections, ripples, trees, all sorts of things that I kind of find my own artistic visual language for capturing it, because I'm there, I'm looking, I'm observing, and I'm just using the materials I have basically to problem solve. So I'm going to teach you this technique. So first thing we need to do is have some sand and some water. So kind of mixing that sand colour. Obviously we're going to start with a base of yellow, but we don't want just yellow, we want to bring in a little bit of warmth from flame red and a little bit of blue, bringing in some cool tones as well. And it still actually needs quite a lot more cool tones. You just want to find the kind of tipping point where it's not, we don't want it to be green, but at the same time we don't want it to look kind of bright yellow. And then plenty of water. So I'm just going to put a bit of sand in. And then along with the sand we have the water. So we're going to go both blues. So we've got ultramarine and primary blue. Little bit of the yellow. Teeny tiny bit of red. Just don't want to make it too muted. A bit more of the two blues. And then lots of water. I'm doing this with gouache, it's what's on my palette, but obviously you could do this with watercolour. This was painted with watercolour, so I'm really using the gouache like a watercolour, so it's fine to do this with watercolour. And then kind of loosely painting this, and where we've got a bit of wet on wet, the water and the sand are kind of overlapping and bleeding into each other, and we're getting a bit of granulation, which is nice. And I find the key with painting water is to really kind of keep it loose. The same with painting shadows, keep it loose, don't get too precise and fussy, leave white space, leave kind of space to kind of for people to interpret it how they want, leave white space that looks like light shining, it looks like movement. So just kind of keeping it very loose. And then we're just going to let that dry. So this is finally dry, so we can paint the little people and the reflections. And this is a demo for painting the reflections using this particular technique that I developed. I'm going to show you in a second, but it's also incidentally a little bit of a demo for painting these very teeny tiny people, because I have been asked that, how do you draw tiny simplified people where they're kind of very small in a larger landscape, so you will see me do that as well. So I need to mix up some colours first. So I need to mix up the skin tone, just going for mixing up some skin tone. Way more yellow. White. So I'm just mixing up some skin tone with a mixture of Permanent Yellow Deep, Flame Red and some Ultramarine, and then I'm just going to put a little bit of white in it. Just needs a little bit more orange. Trying to kind of match what I did in this painting, but this painting was painted with watercolours and I've got different colours in my watercolour set to what I've got in gouache, so a little bit tricky trying to get things to match up. So I think that will be fine. Let's try that. I've got some deeper colour as well there. So teeny tiny people. So I normally start with little head. You can see that it is really, really tiny head, and then I have another person there, and body, so torso. This is somebody with swimming trunks on, arms, and you know, I haven't even done the neck, just floating. Another arm, joining hands with this person. And then he's going to have some trunks on, and there we go, no feet, no hands. Some of them do have feet and hands, but these particular ones don't. And I'm using my size 2 round brush for my Pro Arte collaboration, just putting some little people in. I'm going to grab another size 2 brush for putting in some clothes. Just very, very simple, just block colours. So we've got some trunks, and she's got a kind of hot pink dress. And I need to give her some hair as well. But don't forget hair, otherwise you just end up with a beach of bald people. Obviously there's going to be some bald people, but probably not everybody. So I'm just going to give her some hair. Very simplified. And then going to add some more people. So this is kind of kids running in the water. These people are slightly out of scale. These should be smaller than these, but never mind. It's just a demo. But you can kind of see how much this has all been simplified. So very, very simple. Kind of got little feet there. Let's put on some trunks. Swimming costume. Some hair. One last one. So last one. Someone with a black dress, and maybe I'll put a little hat on the little boy. Okay, so very, very simple. Not even joining up, you know, floating arms. Might make this go a little, make these ones a bit darker so they stand out more. Okay, so we have our people. They don't have any reflections and they're standing on this very shallow still water, so it's time to paint reflections. So what I'm going to do is first of all make some of my favourite chromatic grey mix. So heavy on the ultramarine blue, and then permanent yellow deep, and flame red, blue. So I want the dominant colour to be the ultramarine, because obviously these are reflections, it is watery, they are standing on water. Okay, that looks alright. So now what I want is for this to be very, very watery, and I'm going to paint with the same size brush, so the size 2 brush, and we'll do this quite quickly. So I think I need to take a bit off the brush. Lighten that, there we go. So we've got legs, body, arms, and then this is the really important bit, while the chromatic grey is still wet, then adding in a drop of colour while it's still wet. So this isn't a brilliant example because they're wearing black, but kind of letting the colour spread a little bit. So if we do these ones, and then while it's still wet, putting in that little drop of colour and letting it spread, so you're getting a mixture of the colour and the chromatic grey. Didn't have enough water and skin tone on that one. And then these ones, the kids. So very simple. And then she's got a pink swimsuit, so I'm going to put that in and let that bleed in, and then put in the skin tone. And then this one, little boy. And then while it's still wet, dropping in the blue and dropping in the skin tone. And that's how I paint the reflections, and then maybe give it a little bit of movement in the water, some some more of this very bluey chromatic grey mix, kind of varying the size of the brush strokes. And it's great for adding like little pebbles to the sand. A bit lighter for pebbles. So I've done these a bit bigger and chunkier so you can see what I'm doing, but you can see in this piece they are a little bit more delicate, and if you zoom right in, it kind of looks like nothing, it kind of looks like blobs, but when you zoom out and look at the whole piece together, they do feel like reflections. So that is my technique for doing reflections. So do your reflection with a very, very watery chromatic grey. Mix first, and then drop in your colour, and this works better with watercolours, which I know many of you use. Then drop in your colour with watercolours, and that's my technique for doing reflections of little people in shallow water on a beach. So let's look at creating ripples, particularly looking at this one. So we have a sense of movement around where the boat is, and particularly where the oars are. That's where the movement is coming from, and I think having brushstrokes that reflect that movement really helps, rather than maybe painting this all in as a flat wash of green and then putting the movement in afterwards with dry materials. I have used dry materials to help give the sense of movement, but using brushstrokes that reflect the movement of the water really helps as well. So if we've got something like an oar coming into the water, I'm just going to very quickly draw an oar. We'd want to have brushstrokes that kind of come out and overlap but leave some white space and kind of get bigger as they come out. And then naturally, as we're painting, we kind of run out of paint as we go along, if we're using watercolours or very watered down gouache. And that kind of helps as well, getting the kind of tonal changes, and that it's getting lighter further away. And then, so when I'm painting water, I normally use it really watered down, because then you get this kind of blending, this wet on wet, which I find really helps give that watery look. And I would say have it wet and also have lots on your brush. Again, I find that really helps create the look of water and ripples. And then when that's dry, we can use a bit of mixed media, use white pastels and use darker pencils to really create the look of ripples. So in this piece, we've used this wet on wet technique to create a sense of ripples kind of moving away from the otters. And I really love a filbert brush for this. So this is the filbert brush from my ProArt collaboration, because you can pick up lots and lots of paint with the brush, and then you get these very kind of lovely soft brush strokes, which are lovely for creating water and ripples like that. And I love the kind of bleeding and the wet on wet. I mean, something I actually noticed looking at those other artists' work at the beginning is they weren't using watercolours or using transparent paint. They were using quite opaque paint, and I find it easier to paint water with more transparent paint, because it's watery. Water is a big part of it. It kind of flows and blends and it's transparent. So that really helps me. So I think maybe something for me this month, maybe a goal is to get braver with using thicker gouache to create water. But yeah, this is a lovely technique. I really like using a filbert brush for creating those brush strokes. I'm going to come back to this when it's dry and put some details over the top using mixed media. For now, I'm going to look at creating reflections. So for me, one of the big ways I found of creating reflections was to use horizontal brush strokes. So kind of capturing the movement of the water, these little waves. So we've got the boat and trees and buildings, and then we've got these little horizontal brush strokes and really abstracting everything down. So we've got the man there, we've got the laundry here. So in that case it would just be working very, very simply with a nice rounded brush. So this is the size 5 for my Pro Art collaboration. So something like this is quite nice. I don't want a pointy end to the brush. So I've just mixed up some colours. I'm going to do a very kind of simplified version of this painting. So I'm just going to zoom in on this purple building. So I'm going to do purple building, and I'm going to start with putting in a kind of the edge of the water. And then painting this purple shed. And then just need a bit of a colour for the roof. And then around this, maybe there's some trees. This is just very rough. Maybe the edge there, where the water kind of meets the bank. Right, let's put some trees in. Just very loosely putting in some general foliage around the building. Mixing a little bit of brown for some tree trunks. To wait, that's a little bit wet. And then doing the reflections for that. So rather than just doing a straight copy, what I'm going to do is use horizontal kind of broken brush strokes. They're going to show the movement of the water, the waves, that it's also got a direction to it, it's a river, but using the same colours on the palette and letting some white paper show through as well. So just kind of putting the brush strokes in quite sort of loose and broken, letting the white paper come through, doing them kind of overlap. And then I need that grey colour, and I've turned it into something else, so I need to mix up a bit more of the grey, which was very sensible of me. Check I've got that colour right now. So yeah, one thing to do would be make sure you've got enough of all your colours on your palette. So I've got that same purple so that you can do the reflection. I had a grey and I used it to make some brown, which was quite silly because now I don't have that grey anymore, so I've got to kind of mix it again, which is a little bit of a pain. It was a very, very warm grey. Let's see. And the water's kind of shifting, these aren't kind of perfect edges. I mean, sometimes you will get a reflection that is really perfect. It completely depends on the conditions of the water, whether it's very still or whether it's moving a lot. And so there we've kind of got a sense of the reflections, maybe that the water's moving this way, that we've got little waves, maybe it would be darker at this edge where we've got a little bit of a shadow from the river banks, it would be darker there. Kind of building it up a bit there. So that's a technique that I would use to create a sense of a reflection in water. So I'm using these horizontal rounded brush strokes. So just like this, and just building up the picture that way. And it's good to think about the colours, think about the movement, think about maybe the direction the water's going, think about where there would be depth, so shadows from the bank, that kind of thing. And then we can always add some mixed media on top, so maybe if there's some pondweed on top, we could add that on top with pastels. So that's what I've done in this piece. I've put the pondweed on top of the water. So coming back to this one, we could add some white. These are only just about dry, but we could use something like a white pastel. So this is a white Neocolor pastel and I've just sharpened it till it's quite sharp, and we could use that to put extra definition on for the ripples, or maybe a sense of the ore going into the water, having a bit of depth there. I'm going to paint the ore because it's annoying me that it's so terrible. Let's use a little bit of brown and just paint that. I'm just going to put in some of the tree branches that I wanted in here, and then just putting in little bits of brown there, but quite scattered. So just because this tree branch is very linear doesn't mean I want to suddenly make the reflection linear, so I'm just kind of scattering it in there, bringing that colour in. Just adding a little bit of definition to everything because it's all looking very just a little bit unfinished at the moment. So yeah, that's my technique for painting reflections and for painting ripples. Something else that works when you want a very kind of soft, hazy reflection is to go for a wet on wet technique like this. So I'm just going to do a little kind of demo of that piece. So very roughly we've got boat, and then this was one of our drawing challenges last year when we were looking at colours, because it's got such amazing colours in this piece, but kind of need to mix up some pink, and then this kind of deep turquoisey colour. So just painting boat very simply. And then putting in the pink all around it, so it's sort of at sunset. Ideally you'd want to let the boat dry first, but I'm just doing this all quite quickly just for the sake of the demo. So we've got the water, and then while that's still wet, I'm going to put in the reflection. So we've got that there, and this is gouache, and I've used white in this mixture here. So it's really slowing down the spread of colour, and it's spreading quite differently than if it was watercolours. If it was watercolours, that bloom would spread much faster. And you get an unusual effect with the gouache. You get these kind of little feathery bits at the edge, which I quite like. And then maybe we're going to put in the mast here. We've got the sail, maybe put the sail in. And then maybe the mast, and then I kind of had some other colour, so kind of the pink meets this kind of bluey colour. kind of bringing a bit of depth into this side, and some little sort of just ripples on the water like that. Obviously this is just done very, very quickly to demonstrate, but you can see how you get that kind of bleed and spread with the gouache, which is really nice. It would look also nice with watercolours, but quite different. And I do like that slow spread that you get with the gouache, and then just layering the colours wet on wet, so layering that very watered down blue there to add depth. So that is how I would do that technique, which is another really nice way to do reflections. So those are my top tips for painting water. We've got creating ripples and reflections using different techniques, using kind of varieties of wet on wet, using horizontal brush strokes, using gestural brush strokes, using the natural water in paint, letting it kind of blend and flow and create a watery effect. So these are my personal go-to techniques that I use a lot. But I'm hoping this month to challenge myself to try some new techniques, and maybe using thicker, more opaque gouache creating water, maybe using some mixed media, and maybe being bolder with kind of creating colours and reflections and that kind of thing. So hopefully this has been useful and you've picked up a few different techniques. So yeah, I hope this has been a really helpful video. Please do paint along and have a go at these techniques, have a go doing ripples and reflections and playing with paint. But yeah, hopefully this has been useful, and I think this is going to be a really fun month.